So it's been a while, too long in fact, but here we are. I'm back, and in what better way than a super cheap eBay special, collection only, unloved gaming PC? I couldn't resist. But what do we have before you? What we have, and what cost me the grand sum of £52, I know, right, clickbait. No, it's £52 and not 50, shame on you, but I'm rolling with it. We have a custom PC specialist system in this beautiful retro last gen Corsair case. It is a complete system, so we have all the ingredients needed, but it was sold as faulty. It will be interesting to see how it's held up, as looking at it, it hasn't changed since it was sold in 2016. Specs wise, you've seen the Skylake badge on the front, and we have a little 4-core i5 6500. Pretty weak in 2025, and it hasn't aged too well, to be honest. The motherboard is an Asus Z170-K, a full ATX board with some nice little features for the time. It's DDR4, so at least there's that. And we even have a USB-C port on the rear. Fancy. Having an empty M.2 Gen 3 slot as well is just calling to me. The RAM is period correct, 8GB, two 4GB sticks of 2133, standard green stuff. We do have two extra slots to cheaply add another 8GB if needed. Power supply department is rocking a 450 watt 80 plus Corsair unit, a little dusty and a little underpowered for the XFX Radeon RX 480 4GB. Very underpowered, to be honest, so hopefully it all still works okay. The RX 480 is what sold me on the system, as at least if that works, all is not lost. This was sold with faults as mentioned, and I've not seen the system boot, as yeah, this was one of them. The seller said apparently the system was overheating and shutting off, and upon some poking around it didn't turn back on, so it was just abandoned for a newer PC. Now the keen-eyed among you will have hopefully spotted two of the obvious problems. The first one being that the RAM stick is upside down. Yes, it honestly arrived like this. It's back in its rightful place now, and I can guess from experience that that's probably fixed our no boot issue. This is more of a common occurrence than you'd think, and 90% of the time a PC won't post or boot, it is usually a RAM issue. The other issue we've got is the cooler isn't mounted correctly. Well, it's actually broken on one of the mountings, so this little i5 must have been literally screaming. Luckily I've got this new old stock Intel cooler on hand, so let's just slap that in there with some new thermal paste, and yeah, fingers crossed, if my spider senses haven't failed me, we should have a working PC. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. The PC came with 120GB SATA storage and a 1TB Western Digital HDD. The SSD actually has a broken SATA lead, which I can only assume they murdered along with the upside down RAM job, so I'm going to replace that with a new SATA lead. I've also replaced the CMOS battery for a new one, as that's a super cheap thing to do and it's good practice with an older system. So does it work now? Yes, it does, and it booted straight into a Windows 10 install. Now, being that this has all the person's personal information on before, I have actually just wiped both the drives and installed a fresh copy of 11 on, as the aim at the end of all of this is to sell the PC for a small profit. We now have a working system, and I'm going to get the Dustblower 5000 out, which does more blow than a Henry Hoover and a Colombian Stag do combined. It should clean most of the crap out. I'll spare you guys the montage, but the finished result is this. not too shabby, and it all cleaned up really nice. Now you don't have to be Einstein to come to the conclusion that 8GB of RAM just isn't enough in 2025, so I have added an extra 8GB of RAM that I had lying around. I'm going to value this at £10, although it cost me nothing. The aim is to sell this PC on for a small profit, and I can't be going around selling gaming PCs with 8GB of RAM. A worthy expense, and apart from that, some black vinyl wrap over the HDD. I also removed the HDD cage just to tidy it up a bit. I really don't like those old sort of drive bays in there. Repasted the GPU and just general tidying up and cable management. And the grand total for this build now comes to £72 with the cooler and the CMOS battery as well. And the best thing is, despite all of its abuse, it still actually works. So let's test some games on it. So there we have it. One man's junk is another man's treasure, and I'm really glad I saved this little system and gave it some love. 60 FPS on Cyberpunk and Black Ops 6 isn't too shabby for £70. Okay, Fortnite was a mess in the percentiles, but 4 cores, 4 threads are just about dead, especially when it comes to UE5 titles. Capping any game to 60 FPS would be the way to go with this system, just to smooth everything out. But as they say, beggars can't be choosers, and add an i7-6700 for like 35 quid would definitely be a great option. For the £150 I'm going to list this PC for, I think it will make someone a great little system to get started on. And well, I've had my fun today and doubled my money, so what's not to love? So thank you for watching the video. Please let me know your thoughts down below. Would you ask for more? Maybe add the i7 before selling it, or would you just keep it as a sort of last decade retro gaming system and just have some fun with it? But thank you all for the support as always. God bless, take care, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Cheers.